So in December, we had a solar eclipse. In December 26th, we had this solar eclipse in Capricorn located in the 8th house of pain, change, crisis, and it is in very tight conjunction here with Jupiter. So this obviously has to do with some type of crisis that would erupt in China. Now, initially, when I looked at this, I thought, oh, it's certainly going to be something with the debt. China has more debt now than the US. That's hard to believe. In terms of gross national product to debt, their level of debt is well over 350%. They have more debt than even Europe and Russia combined. Their debt levels have reached parity and have exceeded Japan's. So one of the things that is coming up for them is the fact their economy is slowing down and contracting, and their ability to manage their debt with their shadow banking system and all the debt they created is going to unravel. Now, what's happening at the same time is we're seeing this breakout of this coronavirus in Wuhan, China. And what's interesting is if you look at the path of the eclipse goes right over China and into East Africa. So on December 31st, 2019, which is only 5 days after the eclipse, a novel strain of coronavirus officially designated 2019 nCoV by the World Health Organization was reported in Wuhan, China. And from what intelligence we do have, it broke out of some type of lab or very close to a military lab that was conducting biowarfare research. The Wuhan strain has been identified as a new strain of beta coronavirus form group 2B with a 70% genetic similarity to the SARS-CoV virus that broke out in China in 2003. Now, the virus was suspected to have originated in snakes, but many leading researchers now disagree with this conclusion. So we could see with this eclipse, it broke out around the time shortly thereafter the eclipse, at least officially. It probably was there prior, but it broke out and it became apparent and the plausible deniability was no longer containable during this eclipse. You could see here. So the eclipse, here's the eclipse itself. Here's the eclipse path over China. And we could see this stellium of planets in the 8th house. So just think of the 8th house as they call it the house of death. And it's the house of war. It's the house of conflict. It's the battleground. So it indicates death. From a very literal medieval viewpoint, a medieval astrology would say, well, this country is going to go to war, or it's going to go to war with itself, or it's going to have to fight some type of existential threat. So this coronavirus represents an existential threat to China, probably more so in terms of its economy because of what's happening now. This is very detrimental to China's economy in a number of ways. So we have the bi-wheel here of the December 26th solar eclipse. To the People's Republic of China horoscope is the inner wheel. The outer wheel is the eclipse. Note here that the eclipse right here at 5 degrees of Capricorn, very close to Jupiter in Capricorn. So it highlights and energizes that Jupiter is in direct opposition to the Chinese natal Uranus in the 6th house. Now, 6th house has to do with medical facilities, healthcare. It has to do with the general life expectancy based on the level of health, nutrition, healthcare, medicine. It rules hospitals, it rules medical facilities. So you could see here that it's making a direct hit in that area. Also, it's in the 12th house. So it could indicate to me that this virus may have broken out because there was some biowarfare facility where they were using this virus in some way to be deployed as a weapon, or they used this virus or attempted to weaponize this virus. And through their own undoing, it got out into the public. Now, the 6th house has to do with the house of workers. It has to do with the Chinese workforce. And you could see here the fact that the eclipse is in the 12th house would indicate something where the country does something that undoes the very thing. It's sort of unraveling. Something begins to get unraveled. So, I'm not going to try and make a guess in terms of what the economic impact will be and how contained or not it will get at the moment. But I'm confident as it starts getting warmer in late March and into June, the virus will likely flame out. But China's been, well, for one reason, I'll tell you why I think it will likely flame out. Because one, China's been more aggressive in getting this thing contained compared to the SARS outbreak in 2003. However, that being said, China is a much bigger economy today, both absolutely and as a percentage of global GDP. Its GDP is almost 14 trillion versus 1.5 trillion back in 2003. and the Chinese people are much more mobile. Thus, this is going to have a more broadening impact. So that being said, I would say that we're going to see this virus play out, although it will likely flame out between now and late June. And there's a reason I'm stating that. Now, it will have an impact on its economy. I think that's the real issue. I don't think the issue is this is going to become a global pandemic. I believe it has the potential for that. But from what I'm seeing here is it looks like it's going to be contained, although I do think the losses, the deaths are going to mount. And I do see spreading occurring into other nations, but not getting to a critical mass level of a pandemic. And the reason I state this is we see this annular solar eclipse on June 21st, 2020. Note here, it's going over China again. So it's showing this window. And here it's much longer. It's spread out well into the Pacific, over Japan, into Russia, all throughout India, into Iran, the Middle East, and all the way into West Africa, very close to West and Central Africa. And that would tell me, since these eclipses are very connected to each other, which I'll show in a moment, that this is how the containment or the intensity zone of where the disease will likely spread, this virus, I should say. So the virus pathogen and the epidemic will be localized within this region. So a number of astrologers have talked about it being connected very much with the bubonic plague. And one of the reasons for this has to do with the fact that you see the Saturn-Pluto midheaven alignment cross very close to the area of China that is getting hit very hard. In fact, here's Wuhan. So it's very close to this Saturn, Pluto, Uranus crossing, which is the ground zero area for the coronavirus. And the Saturn, Uranus, Pluto archetypal energy has an importance in the death rebirth process, and the death rebirth process in terms of the psychospiritual unfolding. And these type of processes are often invoked by some existential crisis of some kind. So that's why there's this belief now that the Saturn Pluto, what the Saturn Pluto means is this type of pandemic where there's the potential of losing up to 65 million people can be infected and killed by this virus. And so that certainly would make sense, right? In terms of you see these themes, the Saturn-Pluto-Uranus combination is an archetypal theme that resonates very strongly with apocalyptic cults. So the sense of apocalypse, the sense of, this is something I can't run away from, I can't hide from, I can't protect myself from. This is like sort of God's way of punishing us all. That type of combination of these three planets produces these types of feelings of dread, existential crisis, where we see this type of extremism and ongoing polarization and factionalism all begin to come out of this. Now, the reason I don't believe it will is one of the reasons I just stated earlier. The second reason is the fact that if you look at the bubonic plague pandemic that started in 1345 along the Silk Road, so this is the Silk Road area from China all the way into the Middle East. And then by 1346, it spread from Sicily into the rest of Europe. And it correlated with that period between 1345 during the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Actually, we had a triple conjunction. Within days prior to that conjunction, we had a Mars, Jupiter, Saturn triple conjunction, and we had a Sun, Pluto, Uranus triple conjunction. So we had two triple conjunctions occurring simultaneously. So that is a very, very rare occurrence. So the bubonic plague pandemic that started in the spring of 1345 along the Silk Road in Asia, the Silk Road that connected Asia to the Middle East, and the passageway into the Mediterranean through Sicily and then Italy. It killed nearly 60% of the population of medieval Europe, 60% of the medieval population. So the thing is here we have to look at is that even though we have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius later this year, the key thing to remember is that we don't see any Saturn-Pluto alignment. There is no Saturn-Pluto alignment in this chart. So archetypally, there's no archetypal correlation of Saturn-Pluto with the bubonic plague pandemic of the 14th century. So we need to keep the perspective in check here. There is the potential for pandemic, as pointed out with the fact that we've seen Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Historically, we have seen correlations to pandemics, but right now there's not enough to indicate to me we're going to see a global pandemic. However, that being said, now that I've addressed that, we got to remember that the most populous nation on the planet is China. And we could see up to quite a large number of people infected over the next several months between now and June 21st, which is that follow-up eclipse from December 26th. So we see the annular solar eclipse, June 21st. This is the bigger eclipse. This is a much more powerful eclipse because it's right on the world point. The December 26th eclipse is very powerful, but this one is bang right on the world point at 0 degrees. So I'm expecting some big things to happen in June, and everything that's going to happen in June and early July is all a result of what began in December and early January. We're going to see some real developments, and that'll be something I'll go into more detail when I do the global webinar. But again, keep in mind that we're looking at eclipses that cross each other's path and are very connected to each other by angularity, by degrees. When you see this type of combination, there's this like collective, especially with the fact that you have Jupiter, Pluto right on the midheaven. So you have the June 21st, 2020 annular solar eclipse, Jupiter, Pluto right on the midheaven of the December 26, 2019 eclipse. And these eclipses are opposing each other. So that would tell me some type of collective impulse toward hardened, ruthless ambitions or extreme coercive means and ways to obtain them emerges. Again, some type of major crisis. Moral hazard, excessive bravado, risk-taking, political extremism, self-righteous patriotism, and contentious partisanship, contentious bravado with nationalism, with the potential of creating civil unrest, social revolution, currency wars, trade wars, militant posturing, and cowboy diplomacy in international politics is a likely result of what's going to happen and unfold, particularly in this area of the world, into the Middle East. We have to remember now, based on this eclipse path, we're talking about the Persian Gulf, we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, we're talking about this entire area, which includes China and India. Between China and India, you're talking about 80% of the world population. Now, keep that in mind. I just said 80% of the world population, right? We look at today, as of the 27th, there have been 2,839 confirmed cases, including 82 Chinese fatalities in mainland China. 82 deaths, and we have a total of 2,901 between China and all the rest of the nations listed here. So the CDC calls the virus an emerging public health threat, adding that this threat is serious. The incubation is asymptomatic, contagious, and can take as long as 14 days before the symptoms emerge. So it's quite serious here, and we could see how, again, it's all connected. Look at these eclipse paths. Look at this area of China that's being impacted. You can see very close correlation. Now, the other thing that's happening right now is we went from a melt up to a meltdown, with the coronavirus fears rising over the virus impact on the world economy.
If you'd like to watch more presentations like this on geopolitics, the economy, and world events from an archetypal and mundane astrological perspective, visit Global Transformation Astrology on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/William Stickevers or click the link in the description for twice monthly webinars, plus a monthly Ask Me Anything for Gold subscribers.